Good morning and welcome to another Broker Roundtable. I'm your host, Mike Weinstein with Six Figure Mindshift, where each and every single month we gather together leading brokers from around the valley to come and just discuss issues and questions that these brokers get from situations that we as real estate agents put them into. And so today we have Pam Freestedt from West USA Realty. She's a managing broker at West USA. Carrie Means, who's the broker owner of Wise Realty AZ, and Dean Schipple, the owner designated broker from Bella Vita Real Estate. So let's get rocking and rolling and talk about one of our something that Pam, we'll start with you, but this seems to be something that we are seeing more and more of. I don't know whether it's just the state of the real estate market, with available inventory versus the amount of buyers. I don't know whether this is an indication of the market is moving in an upward trend, but we're seeing a lot more buyer contingencies. And so let's explain what a buyer contingency is.
Buyer contingency is the buyer of your property has not sold their property before they have submitted the contract on you. So they have either a contract on their property right now, or they want to get one. They want to market it for sale. And so it's up to the seller whether or not they're willing to take that risk with the buyer or, and make a decision not to accept that contract or accept these contingent contracts. And there's different types.
So, anyone can jump in here. Let's start from the listing side, because many of us are representing sellers and we're getting offers and we're getting contracts with buyer contingencies. What do we need to explain to the seller, and what are we putting them in an uncomfortable position or in jeopardy if we really don't explain what a buyer contingency truly is and how it impacts and how it could possibly affect them? Because in essence, they could have their property tied up for 30 days and at the end of it, not have a buyer.
Well, and I think it's really important that they do understand that piece of it. And the nice part with it is the contract with the buyer contingency actually allows, if they have an offer of their house, you have the right to see the offer. Also, talk to the other agent that's involved with it, that's selling their house, so that you can stay in touch. And there's communication throughout the whole thing, so that if something starts to go awry immediately instead of on the day that it was actually supposed to close.
All right, is this an indication of the market? Why are we seeing more and more buyer contingencies right now?
Most people don't have the equity to purchase a home, and they're wanting to use the equity, what they have, for their next property. So they haven't built their savings enough to purchase another property while they own it, or they don't have the income to afford both properties. We're seeing it more and more often because it's not an investor market anymore. I would say this is a owner-occupied market where people are selling their home, moving up, and then those people are then selling their home, and they have a contingency on their purchase. So you're looking at sometimes three stacks
entire
of
domino effect here.
Yes, and if that first buyer fails, it affects so many lives and moving companies.
Dee, as far as buyer contingency, when we're representing the buyer, what are the things that we need to be aware of? Maybe what are some common mistakes or common myths about the buyer contingency form?
Well, I think if you're representing the buyer, you certainly have to know where their loan stands and make sure that they've got a long enough process in place to qualify for their loan. You'd also like to see that the selling agent, the listing agent, would turn the listing to pending, which they probably won't, because as a safeguard for the listing, you should probably turn it to under contract accepting backups, which protects the seller. But the buyer needs to understand those different codes on MLS does affect them also. So in other words, if the listing agent accepts an offer, or the owner accepts the offer, the second offer, then the buyer might be thrown totally out of the line and lose their contract.
Yeah, and with that, they'll lose the inspection, the money they spent on their inspection. If they've done their appraisal, anything they've done at that point, the seller does have the opportunity to come back and say, I've accepted another offer, release your contingency. And if the buyer can't do that, they are out that money. You're right.
I would like to assume, but you three are brokers, so we don't make any assumptions
right.
on the behavior of real estate agents. But especially in a buyer contingency scenario, you would like to assume that every buyer's agent is in communication with their buyer's lender. So hopefully, and so you know what's going on. But especially in a buyer contingency, I don't know whether listing agents are aware of the fact that they can also reach out to the lender and be, in demand, or not demand, but expect communication. I think as a seller's agent, especially when you have a buyer contingency offer, you need to probably pick up the phone and have a conversation with the lender and learn as much as you can.
If the lender's willing to talk, that's great. Sometimes you're dealing with a lender that's out of state, or a .com type lender, and that's very difficult to do. And they may not be as willing to talk to the listing agent at that point.
And the biggest tool we have is the LSU, the loan status update. And if you can get your lender to send it weekly, it makes sure that you're staying on track as you continue throughout it.
Right. So the buyer ought to have a contingency plan themselves and be continuing to look at properties for property B if property A falls out.
Okay, and then we did have a question come in, and I'm not sure whether the question is specific to the buyer contingency scenario or just a normal scenario, but what should be the approach for a buyer's agent when entering the inspection period, and what expectations should be set for the buyer? Does it change with a buyer contingency, our approach of going into the inspection?
No, they're probably going to have to spend that inspection money in a timely manner per our contract, and the appraisal may even happen, so they might be out appraisal money also, and there's really nothing they can do. I had a situation with one that the buyer was coming here from out of state, and she had a contingency on her home in Florida, and ended up, our seller is from Canada. They have to go home in a certain time frame. They wanted a 90-day close of escrow. I talked to the agent up front and said, you need to rewrite your contract before I even present it, because it's not going to happen. Ended up that the lady, the buyer, found funds from a relative. And so she came in with cash. And then when she closed on her house, she paid that person back for the loan in the meantime. But otherwise, my seller would have said, no, not accepting it at all, and moved on.
And I would just end this discussion on buyer contingency. I'm going to assume the three of you would agree with me, but especially when you have an agent that's never done written an offer on a buyer contingency, or you're a listing agent and you've never seen one, probably always a good idea to speak to your broker and then get a little insight.
And that's what I did in this situation with the buyer's agent. When she sent it over, I read it and said, I'm not even presenting it. Let's chat. We talked for 20 minutes. I gave her, with the caveat, please go talk to your broker. I'm not your broker. I'm just offering you some suggestions. I gave her 3 different ways to possibly rewrite the contract, and she did, and it worked. But she needed to go back to her broker to see, what would work for her and for her client, and with the broker's permission.
All right. Any last comments about buyer contingency?
Make sure you read the form and understand it before you bring it to your client, or talk to your broker. That would be, because most people.
I'm looking at you because yes, it makes sense, but I don't know how
there's
many of us
so
do.
many things they don't understand, which line means which date, and it's a very complicated form. So make sure you understand it.
If I could put 100 agents in a room, hook them all up to lie detector tests, and say, okay, how many of you have actually read the agency disclosure word for word? How many of you have done it?
I'm talking about 25 of them, maybe. I don't know.
They read it when they were in class that one day.
Yeah, right. I remember that form.
So anytime I like to mess with a broker, and just like to see steam come out of the ears, I always tell them that we have somebody on the phone, and they want to talk about pre and post possession, because I know brokers love post and pre possession scenarios, but unfortunately they're reality in a lot of situations. And so let's talk about pre and post possession. What are some of the things as brokers you want us as agents to understand and to help keep everybody protected?
To understand it is one thing. My brokerage, the answer is no on both. There's too much liability. Who's insuring the home after it closes? There is no post-possession. Do a lease. You get the house closed, do a lease, a whole lease, even if it's for 10 days or 15 days.
Can you write and execute the lease before the close of escrow?
Sure. Just date it for that date of close of escrow forward. Prorate funds. That way, if the house burns down or starts on fire, whose insurance covers it? that, if you don't do a lease, if you're just in there living there until, you can close on the loan, we just say no.
I 100% agree. And it's interesting that it's coming right behind the contingency conversation, because that's where we run into the pre and post possession issues.
Very much so.
So absolutely do a lease. Be very careful, protect your client in this situation. If you're the buyer that is now the landlord, make sure they understand the tenant's rights and the notice information and everything they have to do. Take a security deposit, just as you would in a lease situation. And on the other end, if you represent the seller that becomes the tenant, in most cases, then they have some rights because of that lease. So it is a great idea.
Now, Carrie, my experience, and not that I've personally have done this, well, maybe I have, but in pre and post possession scenarios, and I always, for me as an agent, this is always my opportunity to shine as an agent, because anytime that I can educate my buyer or seller, I mean, it just makes me look educated. I don't, appearance-wise, I don't look educated, so I gotta go with whatever I have. But this issue of insurance, where what agents don't understand, at the moment that you have a pre-possession, post-possession, and or a lease agreement, let's get into the details of what we need to understand about insurance and how insurance changes and the problems that agents have had in the past.
Well, they definitely need to talk to their insurance agents, because the insurance agents are coming across this, and you can get short-term tenant insurance so that they're covered. And a lot of times the insurance companies have a window when the moving and the post possession is, that they know it's not owner occupied, but you don't have to switch it over to a landlord. But each insurance company is different. So it's really important that they talk to their insurance companies and, when you're talking to the clients up front, because it is the buyer contingency, like Pam said, that we're seeing a lot of it is, do you have a place to live? If it's 2-day closing delay on yours, but your house is already closed, do you have somewhere where you can live? If not, what is the plan for it? Because to get two homes to simultaneously close is possible, but it's a reach.
And then I think for when so we have a buyer, they either do a pre or post possession. They're now becoming the tenant. They are literally actually renters. Doesn't matter whether it's for a day, it doesn't matter whether it's for 30 days. During that time period, if there's a flood and all their personal property gets damaged and they don't have renter's insurance, I mean,
they are not covered.
They are not covered. No. And conversely, if the seller now or the buyer becomes the owner of the property and is letting the seller stay in there, and somebody falls down the steps, breaks their legs, if they don't have landlord insurance, because in my experience, insurance companies don't want to pay out. Exactly. And they're looking for any and all reasons not to pay out. That can become very big problem.
Agreed. So it is I'll go back to Dee's very first statement. We don't like it. Nobody likes it. The reality is it happens every once in a while, but the pre-possession, sometimes you have a buyer, like Carrie said, that closes, and then 2 days later, the seller is still in the home. If you have to put stuff in the garage, don't move in. Don't take occupancy. Possession is putting your belongings in the property. And like you said, there's a issue. If something happens to that property, you no longer have your belongings. So, storage companies, family.
You have those big old ugly containers that can come sit in a driveway somewhere, loaded up, and it may be at 110. Well, then you're going to have to do a storage facility with an air-conditioned storage unit. But that is part of what a good realtor does, is we're going to counsel our buyers and sellers on what happens at closing date. What are you going to do? When are you moving in? How are your belongings getting here? Is everything in place, like your insurance and your utilities, et cetera? So that's part of our job. It's what we're supposed to do and be responsible agents.
And safe to say, just because there's a form inside zip forms doesn't necessarily mean that your broker's okay with it. You might want to check with your broker.
That's correct.
Absolutely.
Just say no.
All right. And then the last thing we did get a more of a comment than a question, that if the pre or post possession is for $0 a day, you're just going to let somebody stay in there, that then you can't take a security deposit.
Correct.
So good information.
Terrible idea.
Just say no.
All right, let's talk about our
favorite subject,
recurring
Mike.
cause. I just see this all the time, and I'm not even a broker. I don't pretend to be one. I would never even play one on TV. But I find this one of the most fascinating subjects because there is so much confusion and mythology behind this, and what an agent considers to be procuring cause it may not truly be procuring cause. So let's just jump off the diving board, and Pam, let's go for it.
Well, as a broker, we hear a lot of conversations from the agents. I think I have procuring cause.
Let's backtrack. Let's define what procuring cause actually means.
Procuring cause, the simple definition is the moment that buyer decided to buy that house, you were holding their hand and helping them to that moment. You got them to that moment. That's very simple definition. It's quite long and extensive. Dee has lots of books on it because she serves on professional standards and helps rule in these cases.
Sounds like an enjoyable evening of wine,
so
fireplace, and procuring cause.
Very
books.
relaxing. Not
so. But there's a lot that goes into it. There is no clear-cut definition, and that's why it gets so convoluted and so confusing, and it's costly for the agent to pursue in some cases.
Now, I want to put everybody on the spot because we didn't actually have this discussion, and your opinions may vary, which I always enjoy. One of the things that we are seeing a lot of, and it's a huge concern for agents, is Open Door, and how Open Door operates and how they work. And so I'm working with a buyer, been working with them for 6 months. And maybe I even have a buyer broker agreement in place. And my buyer drives down the road and just texts Open Door and gets the code, goes in, has a conversation or two on the phone with the listing agent. But that buyer then goes back to us as the agent. Can the Open Door agent, and is there a potential down the road of a lot of these being procuring cause issues?
It could, but going back to when did that buyer decide to buy that home? Who knows how many other houses they looked at? Who knows if they were even pre-qualified when they walked into that house? That's like going into an open house almost. So it depends, which is the greatest answer. But you're right. It could be an issue if that Open Door agent feels they were giving agency to that person, giving them, the feel for the market in the neighborhood. They're giving them comps. If they're doing all those kind of things on those 2 phone calls, then more power to them. But there's a lot more to agency than opening a door on both sides.
Yeah, I cannot speak to Open Door's policies. I know some things about those type brokerages, but probably not enough to have an opinion on that. NAR has a good phrase that it's kind of funky, but it's true. It's who shakes the tree and the nuts fall. In other words, I'd rather use apples than nuts, but
I would like to see Big Macs fall from the
exactly,
tree.
Right? And French fries. Oh, and a large Coke to go. And supersize that, please. But that's exactly what happens, is it gets supersized because an agent will say, but I did this. And, we see a lot of cases through professional standards on procuring cause. Pam's answer to it depends is right. We sound like an attorney when we say it depends. And, just a side note on those cases, when we have a case come up, we're given, the documents ahead of time to review before we come in. I read them the night before and have no opinion when I try not to have any opinion when I go into the boardroom the next day. However, when you read that, you have an opinion because it's, one side is stronger than the other until you sit at that table. And as an agent, if you're in a brokerage, you're sitting across the table from us, it's very intimidating to be in that room. You don't want to be in that room. But your opinion matters, but you have to show us what makes this look like you have procuring cause. Things need to be in writing. If you have a buyer-broker agreement, like Pam said, we don't care. It's great, it's nice, but it's only a piece of the puzzle. there is no clear answer until it's all said and done. And even then, someone may look at mediation or may look at arbitration, or there's lawsuits that can get filed if the commissions are big enough, et cetera, et cetera. Procuring cause is a very tough situation to say, I did this. How much work did you do? Was the chain broken? In other words, did you have contact with that client? Continual contact, if 3, 6 months, whatever it is. If the chain's broken, then you have to look at who broke the chain. Did they fire you? Did they continue to move on without firing you? Who broke it? What was your communication with your client? So there's way more that goes into than just a comment that says, I have procuring cause. When did the buyer make that decision, and how did they get there?
Yeah, I think, Carrie, definitely a lot of confusion. I think for where I see a lot of the confusion is agents send a bunch of MLS, planos to their buyer, and they're thinking just because they were the first one to give them information about a property, therefore they've got procuring cause. Right. But then that buyer drives down the road, calls off the sign, or maybe one of those properties there is an open house. And we as the agents go, but they wouldn't have known about it had I not sent them the plano. But that's not procuring cause.
No.
Nope, that's just one step in it. So, and we have no control over our clients as much as we talk to them and tell them. And all you can do is say, hey, you need to be with me. This has happened, and it's going to happen. It just is a given. And when it does happen, talk to the agent up front. Like, you can negotiate the commission and everything else with that agent up front instead of waiting, because we get afraid. We don't want the confrontation. We don't want the argument. We don't want they're going to say I'm wrong. And 90% of the time, if you just talk to the agent, they're happy if you give them 25%, and they don't want to do all the work. And most of them don't want to have the dual agency of it. And that liability of it and stuff. So they're willing.
And you as a broker don't want it either.
Yeah, nope. So if we have the conversation, even the difficult ones in the beginning, they're not going to end up on Dee's desk where she has to read them the day before to go into the room. But I'm
surprised we're not on first name basis yet. You've probably seen a few of mine.
No, I haven't.
So it's just, again, communication and conversations in the beginning make it so that it doesn't get ugly, because the transactions are complicated enough. And then you add us into the mix. There's just no reason.
Where it gets really ugly is typically the amount of the commission. The higher the commission, the nastier it gets. And when you're sitting in those hearings, you can bring in an attorney. And sometimes we're there all day on one case. It just depends. If the attorneys show up, then they start doing attorney speak. Well, attorney speak doesn't really follow our standards of practice. So,
Now,
go to your broker and ask.
Yeah. So then how does the buyer-broker agreement impact this? I think also in my scenario, I've sent you some listings, some planos. I've gotten you to sign a buyer-broker agreement. Therefore, I feel like no matter what happens, I'm covered. Buyer-broker agreement does not equate to procuring cause at no matter what.
No, it's a false sense of security in that case.
Yeah, buyer-broker agreement is an employment contract that this person has employed you. So if they go around you and they use another agent to purchase a property, you then need to sue that person for performance. That has nothing to do with procuring cause, like you said.
Two different things.
All right, so let's. These are really good ones. Oh my gosh, this happens all the time. So I'm a seller. I've got a renter in there, and the renter, especially, let's just for the sake of argument, because it happens frequently, the renter's not that cooperative. They don't necessarily want to move out. But in the event that I'm a seller, I have a tenant in there. They've got maybe 6 months of a 12-month lease left. Get an offer. We got to close of escrow date. What happens to the lease, if anything?
It stays with the home. So the lease, unless it's a foreclosure property, the lease actually stays with the home and you honor the lease. So like I have one that's listed right now and the lease expires November 30th. It's in the listing. So it's very clear that whoever's seeing the house, they're not going to be able to do an owner occupied. So it's just, you have to be upfront with them with it, and the lease stays with the property.
So then the new buyer, buyer now buys it as though he's the new owner, or she's the new owner, or they're the new owner. There's nothing that they can do to evict the tenant. The lease is just is in force.
Right. The lease is enforceable.
So how do we show it? And it's not so much, I think we're all aware, as you know, I mean, the 48-hour rule. Okay. But we recently, I heard recently of a story that the renter didn't want to move, and the lease agreement was expiring. So every time that somebody showed up to the door to see the property, she answered it naked, and made it very uncomfortable
Or at
for
least in a
everybody.
How many
bikini,
times
right?
did you go?
Yeah.
It was
As a matter of
bikini
fact,
the
can we
next
wrap
time.
this up?
He's got to go show it again.
You know, and so the tenant made it very, very difficult. How do you do that? How do you handle this? Not only as a listing agent, but a buyer's agent, when you have a buyer that really, really wants to see the house and the tenant's not cooperative.
Oh, there's a lot to that.
Yeah, they need to provide reasonable access to the owner of the property. But for something like that, sometimes it's better for the owner just to wait till that person's
Mhm.
moved out, just for lots of reasons. But there are ways to entice tenants financially, or pay for their moving, or
Give them clothes.
Yes,
Yeah,
that would be good.
There's
Kohl's
sometimes
gift
there's
card.
everything's negotiable. If that seller wants to negotiate with that tenant on an early, move out, that might work in that case. But like you said, like we always say, it depends, and every case is different. That sounds like a scenario that a listing agent really needs to have a good conversation with their seller.
Well, then the listing agent needs to be very careful of how they market this in MLS or anywhere else. It needs to be very clear that it's tenant occupied, and here are the rules to see it.
And can we put in the MLS that the tenant is difficult? Or does that be casting
I wouldn't
aspersion?
do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that. But, it's the tenant's only willing to show the property between this time and this time. Really what happens is it does a disservice to the owner of the property, because they obviously want to sell it for a reason, and sometimes they're in a hurry to sell it. And if the tenant won't let, anyone in to show it, it's a disservice to the owner. So I like Pam's idea, just wait till the tenant's out. Or if it's a property like a condo in, let's say, on the golf course somewhere in Ocotillo, and you want to release it, but you want to sell it, lease it, but you want to sell it, it's either or. You have to have the buy-in of the tenant in order to do that, and a time frame that works for everybody, or it can get pretty precarious as to who's coming and who's going and who's on first.
So I want to keep to this conversation. So I've got a difficult tenant. Okay, I've got a buyer that wants to see it in 48 hours. I issue the notice to the tenant. Can I show up with the buyer's agent and the buyer and just open up the door if the tenant has received notice? Or
they need to acknowledge the notice and accept the time.
See, because I think that's a big mistake. I'm like, I gave you the 48
Unless there's
hour.
water flowing out the door, there's no reason to open the door without the tenant's permission. Yes, the tenant needs to provide reasonable access. You can do things with notices, and it can get ugly. I would caution against that. And just on another note on this, a lockbox on a tenant-occupied property is a disaster waiting to happen.
Absolutely.
So you've given notice and all that, and then there's a lockbox. It's best if you are at the property opening that door, especially in the situation with the one you were talking about.
If the tenant, I'm getting messages. Everybody wants to know the address. If the tenant is not providing reasonable access, is that grounds to potentially move forward with an eviction?
There's ways to notice them, to get them out. But the lease itself says that the owner can sell the property while the tenant is in the property. So this is contractual. So there are ways to get that person out for breach.
All right, and then what about lending? So I buy a property. There's a tenant in there for another 12 months. So in essence, I guess I'm kind of an investor. Does that impact my ability, or a buyer's ability, to get a loan? Are there different loan programs that they have to pursue, or any considerations we need to make?
It definitely limits it. because FHA, you have to be able to move in with 60 days as well as with a conventional owner occupied property. So if they, so they are limited to a conventional that is for investment properties, or cash is always nice. So there is limitations. I had one the other day that said they could do it, and they were writing the rental part of it on a separate addendum. So I actually called the lender to confirm, and it's not possible. It has to be FHA cannot do it unless you're moving in within 60 days.
So as a broker, I don't want to raise bail money to get you out for fraud.
Right.
Agent who thinks they can get around that. So you can't lie to the lender. Their buyer can't lie to the lender and say, this is owner occupied. Well, we're going to be bailing you out. More money in the coffer. But you can't lie to the lender. And if the buyer is saying it's going to be owner occupied, then the loan is such. It is an owner occupied property. If there's a tenant in there and they want to continue to keep the tenant and collect rent, or put in a new tenant and collect rent, then truthfully, it's not an owner occupied property.
But okay,
so it's fraud.
But now I'm in the in between. Is I buy a property, the tenant has another 9 months left. I'm planning on occupying the property, but I have to wait 9 months before the tenant's lease expires.
Correct. As if you get the loan as owner occupied, or you're an investor and you come in with an investor loan, and then your rate's going to be higher. And that's the key, I think, right, ladies? That they don't want to do that. They don't want to pay
9 months
the higher
later,
rate.
you're an investor.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly. And then you've lied, and it's fraud, and I'm not going to bail you out.
Yes, she will.
I'll buy you Big Macs.
Okay. All right. Off the tree, right? All right. Well, we'll bail you out.
Oh, yeah. And then we did get another message in here. One of the things that you have to consider, especially on how long the rate lock is,
right,
and so forth. So it's another interesting scenario into it. So especially if you got an FHA buyer and you see that the property has got a tenant in there, probably the first question is, how long is the tenant in there for? Because if they're only in there for 2 weeks, not a big deal. But if they're in there for 6 months, it could be problematic. All right, we real quickly want to let you know about our next six-figure Mindshift Power Lunch. We're actually going to the West Side, Goodyear. So West Side is the best side. And this is perfect for me because this is like 5 minutes from my house. And so we want to invite you. So this is an opportunity where what we do periodically is we bring you an opportunity to come and hear some of the leading top producers in your area. And in this case, we have Michelle Minnick from West USA, and we got Keller Williams, we got Todd Smith. And so this is their chance to share their insight, their secrets to success, as well as just top entrepreneurs. I know as agents, it's important for us to just hear from business owners and entrepreneurs as well. So want to invite you to be part of that. You can go to Six Figure Power Lunch and register for it. Again, it's going to be in Goodyear on April 20th. So love to see you there. All right. So I'm a content guy. So this is I love this. I tell agents ask me all the time broker questions, and as you know right now that I should not be answering any type of broker questions.
Yeah, it's gotten kind of scary.
yeah.
Showing homes with naked people.
Yeah.
It's always
depends on how you look at it.
We have an interesting industry.
No kidding.
But content. I think the X factor in the recent years is the digital space of not knowing not only how to behave digitally, but how much ramifications and how much trouble that we can get into. And I try to teach kids this. Once you hit send, you can't ever pull it back. And so it's so important to said use a filter when posting blogs, and I put etc. because Facebook and sending text messages and things like that, it can get you into hot trouble. But one of the scenarios that we see is, we talked about procuring cause of, okay, I'd like to think that it's common sense. You can't talk negatively about a buyer or a seller. But agents feel like it's just open game to go on Facebook, to go on these chat rooms, or even write blogs. And when they're upset with another brokerage or another agent, whether it's from their own brokerage or another brokerage, it can get you into trouble. And you got to be very careful about false and misleading statements, because attorneys look for these things.
Absolutely. So my thought on, the blogs, it's a filter, but it's more than a filter, because Article 15 of our standard of practice is very clear. False statements, misleading statements, you're going to make derogatory statements. If you and I are sitting in that hearing and I lose the case against you, and I lose a huge commission check, is it going to make me mad? Probably. So do I have the right to go out there and jump on my Facebook page and growl and say nasty things about you? And no, it does not. I cannot name you. I cannot talk about it. If we start talking commission with a group of agents in the same room, then we're talking about a whole nother federal issue that you don't want to go to. So we have to be nice to each other. Just because you and I had an issue doesn't mean I can go out and slam you out in public, with other agents in the room or other brokers in the room. It's not respectable, and it's just not cool. I mean, stop it. I am on, there's a blog out there that I refuse to even go on, because some of the things that I see on there make me very, very, very nervous. There could be ethics complaints against some of those agents for the things that they say. So you can't be too careful.
Another thing to watch for is posting stuff, even not even about other agents or about the industry, just posting some really dangerous things on social media, when up in the title of where you work and what you do is on the same page.
Exactly.
So being cognizant of what you're saying and who this is going to, and the fact that even though it's your personal page, it shows where you work, it shows what you do for a living. So it's a fine line, and be careful with your wording and some of the words you use.
Yeah, well, and that just kind of goes to social media specific, especially Facebook. And I know LinkedIn has business pages as well, but we don't spend as much time on LinkedIn as we do Facebook. So agents will say, well, I've got a business page, and so obviously it's my business page and I handle myself professionally, but this is my private page, and I've got my First Amendment rights, and I get to say whatever I want. And I've seen them. And especially if you do on your personal page, if you've identified yourself as a realtor, and especially with a brokerage, just because you have your First Amendment rights doesn't mean that the Department of Real Estate or National Association of Realtors is going to respect your First Amendment rights.
Right.
In this case.
That's
Absolutely.
Right. You could lose your license and be fined.
So do we see defamation cases in this respect in the real estate? I foresee it coming down as people just lose their everlasting minds on social media. I mean, the minute that I can prove that you've damaged my reputation and I have experienced a loss of money, I'm coming after you.
Mm-hmm. I've seen them in the past, and they were personal pages, and they were said about other people in the industry, and those did go places. And even though they're saying it is, this is my personal page, like you just said, the things that you're posting are associated with you as a realtor, and you need to be careful. So yes, I would say that there are cases out there.
Well, and I have to be careful because I can't talk about it, but I have been involved in the past with a so-called secret page. So, you can make your pages in Facebook and other places secret.
I'm going to post that address to that one property.
Right, exactly. So don't think it's so secret, because as things get further down the road and attorneys get involved, they find your secret places. And it's very damaging to you and your company.
Yeah, and I mean, almost everybody knows how to do a screen capture. So you may think it's on a secret page, but you know what? I know the person that you're slamming, and you don't know that I know that person.
Right.
So now I'm going to, screen capture that image. I send it to my friend, and even though it started out as a secret page, it's now become public. And then text messages. It's so darn easy.
Yeah. Click, and you've got a picture.
And you've got a picture of it, and these can be used against you.
And they do get used against you.
Yeah. So I also like this the statement here about false and misleading statements. So just because you feel wronged and you've got a very strong opinion that I've wronged you doesn't mean that I really wronged you. So because you're out sharing your opinion And even though you think you're right, and you're talking about, how I wronged you and I did this to you and I don't do that, you just got to understand that can be false and misleading no matter what you think.
Well, and it doesn't even have to be as long as that. It can just be a comment, oh, that Mike, blah, 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 blah. Just as simple as that. Just to say, you're a horrible person, and they don't even have to talk about what caused it. It's still slamming you. It's still false and misleading. It could hurt you and your business practice.
And so what does the Department of Real Estate, in the Code of Ethics, does it address how we are? Obviously, it deals with how we're supposed to treat the consumers and the public, but does it address and deal with how we're supposed to treat one another?
I can read you Article 15 if you'd like.
Summarize.
I do have it prepared. It's very simple. It says realtors shall not knowingly or recklessly make false or misleading statements about other real estate professionals, their businesses, or their business practices. There you go.
Bam. There it is.
So you can end up in professional standards.
Yeah.
So and I know this is kind of off topic, but we're talking about digital space and social media. So many of us are marketing our businesses and providing offers and trying to get consumers. How much do you see agents coming to you and say, hey, this is what I'm going to market. This is what I'm going to advertise. Because I think a lot of the things that we do as agents, and I've seen some things where agents say you get this, but they haven't put all the details and haven't clearly articulated and defined the details. But misleading and false information can get you in a lot of trouble when you're advertising yourself as well, and think you can do things that you really can't. And next thing you know, you're writing checks.
Right. And as brokers, we're responsible to approve all advertising that goes out. So it doesn't matter if it's Facebook or print, because we're all used to the print was easy for us to approve. But we need to be seeing their Facebook pages, make sure our logo's on them. The Fair Housing logo, there's so many pieces of it that now with technology makes it much harder on the broker side to be able to watch.
Well, and remember too, we are a small community. We're going to see each other somewhere else down the road. I may have a cross sale with someone who absolutely can't stand me somewhere down the road. How's that going to go? If they've been slamming me in the past, and, I can't say you can't come show my property if I have a listing. So understand we are a small community and we need to respect each other. Keep your personal opinions to yourself, especially in groups.
Yeah. So hopefully my wife's listening.
I can't help you with that one.
All right. So everybody's, for the most part, we've gotten used to the new and improved revised contract and additional clauses. So I thought we'd spend some time doing this. Page 8 now is a full page. Just nothing but lines. Why and how should we be using this, and should we ever leave it blank?
Yes, leave it blank.
And draw a diagonal line through the entire thing on most occasions.
If need be. The only reason to use it is to change something in here that is special for this contract. So there's many things you could put on here, but in my experience, very little is needed. So, negotiating personal property, no. Negotiating certain things on here, that's not what this is for. It's for changing terms. So
you can haggle and negotiate your commission on page 8, right?
That sounds like a fantastic idea.
Wow.
Why doesn't everyone do that? No, nothing about a commission in a contract.
But it's done a lot.
It is done, and it gets fixed quite a bit. So it is not part of the contract. I believe it's in bold somewhere. And so the main thing is when you're negotiating on seller concessions, that one comes up a lot, and that goes on page 8 if you want to add or subtract from what's on there. Some sellers are very emotional about paying seller concessions to someone purchasing their home, and they say, well, look, I'll pay your title and escrow fees only. So that's where you would go to page 8 and change that line. If the buyer needs a little bit more, this new revision of this contract took out prepaids. So if prepaids are pertinent for this buyer, then you would need to go into page 8 and rewrite that sentence completely and add prepaids or add other things that your buyer will need. So we have a great line for that. that would be helpful. So a buyer who, and Dee brought up the thing yesterday, so I'll let Dee talk about it first and go
I like
from
your
there.
line though.
Yeah.
Well, remember that anything that you write on our contract is going to take precedence over the printed matter. So be careful what you're changing and make sure that if you're going to change something like concessions or prepaids, paragraph 2J, lines 100 through 102 are where you need to read and understand them before you go changing it, because you may change part of it, but not all of it. So if you're in FHA has different rules, VA has different rules of what the buyer can pay and what the seller can pay, how it gets paid.
And that you can't, what you write can't supersede FHA guidelines.
Right. You have to understand your lender. You need to be careful, because if you're going to change some of this, the lender may not approve the loan from what you wrote on page 8 or anywhere else. So you have to follow lender guidelines. So you need to talk to the lender first to make sure that whatever the loan is, those words are going to work for the loan. But Pam has some awesome words
that I've run into.
She's come into a simple line that might help all the brokers out there if they're going to try and change this.
Yeah, there's a way for the buyer to use up the entire amount that they've asked for, because sometimes they don't use the whole amount. They can use it for other items, or buying down their rate, which could be considered loan costs, or purchasing a 2-year home warranty instead of a 1-year. And in that free form language that you add to what's already on line 101 and 102, in the way you're going to word that, saying any buyer indicated charges in the transaction and prepaids. So any buyer indicated charges in the transaction refers to the buyer saying, well, I've got a little left over. I'd like to have a 2-year warranty. And there's nothing that seller can do at that point. They've agreed to the dollar amount.
Right. That's what's
instead
important,
of what
is the dollar amount.
So I find, and Carrie, we'll throw this one out to you and anyone can jump in, because I think we're agents. Well, first of all, let's start with the fact that all you really need to do is pass. It takes 90 hours of real estate school, pass a couple tests, and have a pulse. And congratulations, you now have a real estate license. There are no tests for spelling ability and grammar.
Right.
Okay.
That is true.
Okay. I get all that. And as a matter of fact, when I go show homes, or when I used to show homes, agents have never seen a compass. Okay. They don't know the difference between northeast, southwest. I kid. Well, actually, I don't kid. I don't kid.
We're always lost.
So I say all that, and that's okay.
Yes.
I'm not, not all of us are strong spellers, and very few of us probably have legal degrees. So as a broker, how important is this for you to see what your agents are writing on page 8, especially when you're talking about concessions and things like this? Because I think for some agents, they're like, I don't want to put my broker out. I should be able to figure this out, or I know what it means. And just because, my wife and I, we have this discussion, I think I know what I mean, but apparently I'm not clearly articulating.
It was your intent. It's the intent.
An intent. That's a great point.
Right,
intent really means nothing.
Right.
It's what's written. So how much do you guys want to see this stuff?
It really depends on the experience of the agent. So the more experienced ones, they know the wording. You've seen it 100 times on their contracts and stuff. The newer agents, get mentors, talk to us. We'd rather see it up front. Also, take the time when you're writing the contract. Too many times we're like, oh, we got to quick get this out for electronic signature. So we don't reread what we actually write, because we're like, oh, we're going on to the next thing, wherever we're going. And if we would even just, as you write the contract, take 5 minutes and go back and read what you do slowly, you would catch so many of your mistakes, not just the spelling mistakes, but like you said, does it really say, is it detailed enough with it? And in doubt of any time, contact your broker. Your brokers, they may not be where they can pick up the phone, but we have text, we have email, and all realtors live with their phone on their hip. It's not like it's never not with us.
Well, and since this is a broker conversation, broker to broker, the brokers who are listening can make up a list of additional, we have a whole page of additional clauses that can be used that Michelle Lind so gracefully wrote for us. We can use that. But as a broker, make up your own verbiage. Like, the sentence, Pam and I were chatting about this yesterday, and I loved what she said. I'm like, that covers it.
Well, and we're going to have everybody people want you to repeat that. So I'm going to give everybody
good.
30, 60 seconds to go get a pen and a piece of paper.
Yes.
And so, and Pam's going to repeat it a couple times for us.
Because it is a struggle, because agents are trying every which way to write it. And what happens is the seller gets upset. It's like, well, they've only spent $2,500 of the $3,000. I don't want to give them any more. No, it's not what you signed. The contract said up to $3,000, but you can't just say up to $3,000 or whatever, or a percentage, whatever the amount is. You have to list exactly what it's going for, understanding lending guidelines. So talk to your lender, brokers make up your sentences, hand them out to your agents, and we'll see a lot less of this. But this has become a big issue with the revised contract.
So go ahead, Pam. So what is this address again? And then you're going to repeat it and everybody's going to write it down.
Okay, so this addresses if there's excess seller concessions that the buyer wants to use for something else. So like I said, like an additional year on their home warranty, or
at the end of the day, you want whatever the concessions are, you want your buyer to be able to use every dime.
Correct. Yes. When you're representing the buyer. Correct.
Right.
So
the sellers agreed.
The sellers are yelling in your ear. So
the
the sentence here that works is any buyer indicated charges in the transaction. So, and you would add that to lines 100 through 102 in the page 8. I do want to take this a step further. That happens when people are negotiating their benzers, and they are negotiating, I'll just give you $2,500 for repairs. I'm using a number that's just a cool number. So what's happening is that addendum, now the benzer never goes anywhere but between the buyer and the seller and their agents. It doesn't go to title. It doesn't go to the lender. Please, please, please. But when you do the addendum to reflect that want and that agreement, some agents are making the mistake of not adding in the seller concessions that they already agreed to. Mm-hmm. So let's say the seller concession on the contract was $1,000 and they're writing the addendum for $2,500, but it really should be $3,500, because on the benzer they're saying, in lieu of repairs, seller will credit buyer $2,500 for repairs.
Agent commission credit here.
It could be.
It could be. So when you do that addendum, it's overriding what's in the contract. So be very careful and slow down, like Carrie said. Make sure you're adding that to what's already been agreed to in the contract. Make sure the lender can go that high, and then everybody agrees.
All right, Dee, we did get a request. So you talked about the additional terms already pre-written. Mm-hmm. How do people get a hold of that?
No, what I'm saying is the contract.
No, I thought you
it's
said
the additional.
It's
the additional clause addendum.
Yeah. Oh, it's in the additional clause.
Yeah,
addendum.
So Zip Forms has it. Just look for the additional clause addendum, and it gives you the additional clauses. There's 5 or 6 of them.
There's 2 pages of them.
There's 2 pages, and and another good idea for the brokers, since this is all brokers on the call.
No, it's not. This is agents.
Not. It's agents too.
Agents,
okay,
yeah.
So Michelle,
agents
can get this too, but Michelle Lind, our CEO of AAR, has written a book, and I live with her book because it gives you scenarios and ideas to help your agents. And agents, if you're listening, you can get the book too.
But it has information from the 2016 contract.
Yes, because it hasn't been. She's working on updating it, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still using the 8.5 by 14, original one pager front and back, and
those were the days. I loved that contract; it was awesome.
Yeah,
but no, you can't use it.
Did it have extra lines?
Yeah.
True story. My very first contract I ever wrote was a 9-page lease purchase addendum to that contract.
Oh my goodness.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It was fantastic.
I'd love to see that.
I didn't have a clue what I was doing.
Your broker didn't either.
All right. So let's, I do want to emphasize, Pam, or any of you can jump in. The benzer is not part of the contract.
Correct.
And you said don't send it to your lender. Your lender doesn't want to see
Please
it.
don't. Yes. That would make you very angry.
And it could
blow up in your face.
It could blow up. It could kill your deal.
And title does not need to see that either.
No.
You do a separate addendum to what's agreed to on there that changes any terms in the contract.
All right, so we do just have a few minutes left over. Anything else you want to raise? Any additions to any of the comments, and any just free for all out there, and anything else that agents need to be aware of, or is there any other challenges that you're finding with the revised contract that you like agents to just understand?
I think the non-warranted items, all of that being taken out, I'll just throw this out there. I love the new contract. It's the revised contract. It's not new, it's just revised.
Revised, right.
I love it. I've worked with bankruptcy attorneys for years, and I've had to just slash everything out of our contract because it didn't coincide with what the bankruptcy trustees needed. I don't have to do that so much with this contract because we aren't worried about warranted items. When's it covered? How's it covered? How does the BINSR, affect it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just open your minds and say, it's a resale home. It's not a new house. It's not a new build. It's a resale home. There's going to be things that need to be repaired or replaced. Address it as such.
Yeah. Another thing that's coming up quite a bit is the online lenders and some of the big lenders that are VA lenders like USAA or some companies like that. They're not Arizona banks for the most part, are not filling out our pre-qual form. The contract does state that an AAR pre-qualification form is attached. There's no option there. So when that happens and you cannot get this form filled out, there's nothing that says the buyer can't mark the boxes based on what they know and sign the document. So if that is causing people problems, this is the buyer's responsibility to deliver these items. They know if they've given them the tax returns. They know if their credit report's been pulled. They know those things and they sign on the bottom. That's why they signed this document. They need to agree to what's written on here and attach the letter that you've received from that lender.
Right.
And same with the LSU.
All right, ladies, thank you very, very much for joining us this morning for our Broker Roundtable. As a reminder, again, we have our next six-figure Mindshift Power Lunch coming up on April 20th in Goodyear. So you have the link there. It's going to be a phenomenal afternoon that includes lunch. I've had a couple of emails. Is lunch going to be served? Well, it is called a power lunch, so I don't know what else
Everyone's getting a power bar.
I can do. Yes, yeah, you're gonna get it. So please feel free to join us, and even if you're not from the West Valley, you're more than welcome to join us. And lastly, our next Broker Roundtable will take place Friday, April 28th, and you will get reminders. And appreciate everybody joining us. And Pam, Carrie, Dee, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for the opportunity
and your knowledge. And as soon as we're over and we sign off, I'm going to probably get slapped around for some of the comments that I made. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.